quest for the elusive very first rock and roll record is one that can never achieve its goal. A couple of titles are frequently mentioned in this context, but the fact is that to select Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock, or Jackie Brenston's Rocket 88, or any other record as the first, is to make an essentially arbitrary decision. One can point to a time when there was no rock and roll. Equally, the large number of rocking records from the second half of the 50s is testament to the time when the music had definitely arrived, but the boundary between these two conditions is no more precise than that between day and night. Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry was issued in 1958 and is beyond consideration. It is, however, the defining example of the rock and roll genre, the song most likely to be selected for a spontaneous jam by rock musicians old enough or aware enough to be in touch with the music's roots. On record, covers of Johnny Be Good have been tackled by artists as diverse as Jimi Hendrix and the Beach Boys, Dr. Feelgood and Meat Loaf, the Grateful Dead and Tom Jones. Peter Tosh has transported the song to Jamaica, Buck Owens to Nashville. The Sex Pistols tried to trash it. Status Quo have based virtually their entire career on it. John Lennon, who played Johnny Be Good during the early days of the Beatles, it is on the group's Live at the BBC CD compilation, said, "If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry." In the 1985 film Back to the Future, the character Marty McFly, played by Michael J. Fox, travels back in time 30 years from the mid-80s. During his subsequent adventures, he has the chance to play guitar with a local R&B band, and naturally chooses to play Johnny Be Good. The other musicians don't know the song, for them it has not yet been written, but they do know the chord changes, and they proceed to tackle them with enthusiasm. A delightfully irreverent sequence shows one of them ringing his cousin, none other than Chuck Berry himself, to let him hear over the telephone line a sound that he can adopt as his own. McFly dumbfounds everyone, however, and succeeds in bringing the proceedings to a complete halt by launching into a post-Van Halen guitar break, quite alien to his 50s audience. In truth, Chuck Berry's own original version of Johnny Be Good does sound rather dated, weak even, to ears accustomed to hearing more modern renditions. But in 1958 it was definitely state-of-the-art. Berry's tale of the teenager who hopes to make it big as a guitar player encapsulates every rock and roll fan's secret ambition. It is not surprising that a song whose lyrics are actually about the rock and roll dream establishes a particularly firm foothold within the music. The simple tune sits squarely on the standard 12-bar chord changes that underpin the whole of rhythm and blues, changes that are conveyed by two crucial instruments, a piano, played percussively in the upper register to ensure that its sound cuts through, and Chuck Berry's own lead electric guitar, which frames the entire song and effectively acts as the voice of Johnny Be Good himself. A second guitarist plays the actual chords, but quietly, and the bass is not an electric instrument, but an enthusiastically plucked double bass. It is entirely significant that the creator of Johnny Be Good is black, since the arrival of rock and roll marked the commercialization within white America of a music that had essentially been played by black musicians for several years previously. To properly explore the roots of rock and roll, it is necessary to travel back over 20 years before Johnny Be Good. During the course of 5 sessions held in November 1936 and June 1937, singer-guitarist Robert Johnson recorded 29 songs that provide between them the basic instruction manual for playing the blues. Although he did not invent the music, he formalized both its structure and the patterns of its lyrics into a shape that rapidly became definitive. Since Robert Johnson, the term blues has primarily referred to a very specific kind of song. It is one whose verse has exactly 12 bars. The first 4 of these float a line of lyrics over the root chord or tonic of the piece. In a guitar blues, this is most often an A, a B, or an E chord, since these are keys that come easily to fingers coping with the normal tuning of a guitar. They allow the frequent use of open, unfretted strings, which tend to ring out more powerfully when struck. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. Robert Johnson sings this over a repeated B chord that is the root tonic in his song, Crossroad Blues. The line of lyrics is then repeated for emphasis over 2 bars based on the chord of the 4th step of the scale, or subdominant, an E chord in this case, followed by 2 more bars of the tonic. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. Finally, by way of a response to the song's double opening call, a rhyming line of lyrics is sung over 1 bar based on the 5th step of the scale, or dominant, an F-sharp chord in this case, followed by 1 bar based on the subdominant, and to finish the verse, 2 more bars based on the tonic. I asked the Lord above for mercy. Poor Bob, help me please. Johnny Be Good has this same structure, although Chuck Berry, despite using no saxophones that would appreciate it, chooses a jazz key B-flat. And so do the great majority of the rhythm and blues songs that precede it. Even the exceptions like Muddy Waters' Mannish Boy, which sticks resolutely to the same A chord throughout, or John Lee Hooker's Dimples, which leaves out the 2-bar return to the tonic and is turned into a 10-bar blues, are essentially the results of their creators playing games with the form that both they and their audiences view as being standard. Crossroad Blues and its companions, therefore, provide a basic ingredient for rock and roll, even though they are not rock and roll themselves. In 1929, pianist Montana Taylor recorded a piece he called Detroit Rocks. The powerfully rhythmic playing style of this blues instrumental had been unveiled just a couple of years previously with the release of Meade Lux Lewis's first recording of Honky Tonk Train Blues, and it was christened Boogie Woogie in 1928 via the Clarence Pinetop Smith recording Pinetop's Boogie Woogie. A number of pianists made Boogie Woogie records during the next few years, but without any of them managing to achieve more than minority appeal. In 1938, however, impresario John Hammond organised a showcase concert of blues, gospel and jazz, staging it at New York's Carnegie Hall under the title of Spirituals to Swing. The concert was a huge success and achieved Hammond's goal of bringing these black music forms to the attention of mainstream America. The surprise hit of the show turned out to be a trio of furiously pounding boogie-woogie pianists performing together, Meade Lux Lewis, Pete Johnson and Albert Hammonds. The music moved overnight from cult to mass market, expanding beyond its traditional unaccompanied piano instrumentation and becoming in the process a central part of the developing rhythm and blues band sound. There is little difference between the boogie-woogie playing of Montana Taylor or Meade Lux Lewis and the rock and roll playing of Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis or Johnny Johnson, pianist with Chuck Berry on Johnny Be Good. At the time Robert Johnson made his recordings, big band jazz was in the ascendant. Band leaders like Count Basie and Duke Ellington were packing out the black clubs in Harlem and elsewhere with the music they called swing. In his autobiography, Malcolm X describes the dancing that audiences would do to this music. It was called the lindyhop. If you've ever lindyhopped, you'll know what I'm talking about. With most girls, you kind of work opposite them, circling, sidestepping, leading. Whichever arm you lead with is half bent out there. Your hands are giving that little pull, that little push, touching her waist, her shoulders, her arms. She's in, out, turning, whirling, wherever you guide her. With poor partners, you feel their weight. They're slow and heavy. But with really good partners, all you need is just the push-pull suggestion. They guide nearly effortlessly, even off the floor and into the air, and your little solo manoeuvre is done on the floor before they land, when they join you, whirling, right in step. Following Cab Calloway's million-selling hit of 1939, Jumping Jive, the lindyhop metamorphosed into the jive. Sometimes too it was known as the jitterbug, but the dance was the same. As the music changed, young dancers found that their moves still fitted. Teenage audiences jived Johnny B. Good and music in the same rock and roll style, without even thinking about it.
The tune is bad and the words are wrong. Oh, by Jove, it's a smashing song. Piccadilly Rock, Piccadilly Rock. Everybody knows as they go at the Piccadilly Rock.
Now this is the big chance to show what you can do in front of all your mates.
Crazy clock, chimes
And not a hair out of place.
Keep me ready, really ready. It's the Piccadilly Rock.
David and Beth have come all the way from Stevenage, and they're determined to be placed in the last three.
In 1942, in recognition of the growing economic importance and influence of black music in America, Billboard magazine introduced a specialist black music chart published alongside its established popular music hit parade, which began in January 1936. The Harlem Hit Parade, as it was called, featured as its first number one, Take It and Git by Andy Kirk and his Clouds of Joy, a swing big band.
Boys, take it and git. 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 Solid, man. I got it.
Through the 1940s, a variety of songs appeared in which the beat was emphasized more and more strongly, and the jazz content, the rhythmic bounce, and the improvisation became reduced. By 1948 to 49, the transformation was complete, with a number of records having a sound more or less indistinguishable from that of rock and roll records made in the 1950s. Of these, Good Rocking Tonight by Wynonie Harris was a #1 hit in the Billboard Black Music chart, now called Jukebox Race Records, and has the distinction, therefore, of being the first record sounding like rock and roll to become a big hit.
Away all my blues. Have you heard the news? There's good rockin' tonight. Rock.
Later the same year, Chicken Shack Boogie by Amos Milburn also reached the #1 spot with the same rhythm and a similar sound, while We're Gonna Rock, We're Gonna Roll by Wild Bill Moore was also a hit in 1948, though without getting to #1. Bluesman Muddy Waters entered the charts with his second single, I Can't Be Satisfied. Accompanied only by the slapping double bass of Big Crawford and his own incisive electric slide guitar playing, Waters delivered a performance that is pure rock and roll. It is the bass playing too that gives the country recordings of the Maddox Brothers and Rose their power, especially on their cover of Hank Williams' Move It On Over. Moving through into 1949, more rockin' records were produced with differing approaches to the same kind of rhythm, among them Drinking Wine Spodie O.D. by Stick McGee, Rock the Joint by Jimmy Preston, Rock and Roll Blues by Earline Harris, Rock a While by Gory Carter, and Do the Boogie by John Lee Hooker. The first million-selling rocking record followed only a little while later. The Fat Man was the first single by Fats Domino, issued at the end of 1949. Although it only reached #2 in the chart that Billboard had renamed a second time earlier in the year, now it was the Rhythm and Blues chart, it also achieved some success in the main hit parade. Selling steadily over a period, the record had achieved 1 million sales by 1953. In 1956, following a few more million-selling singles, Domino released his first LP. This was called Rock and Rolling with Fats Domino. There was no question by then that this was the genre of music that Fats Domino was playing. The first track on the LP was The Fat Man, now happily included as a rock and roll song. The increasing emphasis on rhythm during the 1940s within the music that had come to be known as rhythm and blues was paralleled by a similar development within country music, even if the accompanying dance of choice was less likely to be the lindy hop or jive than a two-step. In June 1951, guitarist and singer Bill Haley, leading a western swing band he called Bill Haley and the Saddlemen, had the idea of recording a cover version of a contemporary rhythm and blues hit. He chose Rocket 88, which was at the top of the rhythm and blues chart at the time, performed by Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. There are a few differences in instrumentation in the two versions. Haley uses a pedal steel guitar in place of Brenston's saxophone, and he has no drummer. Instead, the rhythm is driven by a bass player, whose slap of strings against fingerboard gives all the percussive beat that is needed. On Brenston's version, the bass is inaudible if it is there at all, although its usual role is carried most effectively by Willie Kizart's guitar. Haley also adds the roar of a car engine at the start and ending of the song, which may or may not be that of an actual Rocket 88 car.
You heard the noise they make, let me introduce you to my rocket 88. Yes, it's great, just won't wait. Everybody likes my rocket 88. Cows will ride in style, moving all along.
Bill Haley continued with his new sound on subsequent singles, including a cover of Jimmy Preston's Rock the Joint, on which Haley's lead guitarist, Danny Cedrone, plays a solo identical to the one he later used on Rock Around the Clock. In 1953, Haley's perseverance paid off when his fifth single for the Essex label, Crazy Man Crazy, written by Haley and his bass player Marshall Little, became the first rock and roll song to enter the Billboard pop charts, reaching number 15. By now, the Saddlemen had been renamed the Comets, and Haley had added a drummer to the lineup, although he retained the pedal steel guitar. In 1954, Bill Haley signed to the Decca label and issued a single called 13 Women to moderate success. A second Decca single presented a version of a contemporary rhythm and blues song, Joe Turner's Shake, Rattle and Roll. It proceeded to sell 1 million copies, reached number 7 in the pop charts, and even managed to reach number 4 in the most widely accepted British chart, that published in New Musical Express. Both chart feats marked a first-time achievement for a rock and roll artist. In 1955, the B-side of 13 Women was chosen as theme song for the film The Blackboard Jungle. The record was flipped, re-released, and went on to become a bigger hit than Shake, Rattle and Roll. Rock Around the Clock stayed at number 1 in the Billboard charts for 8 weeks and reached number 1 in the UK as well, where it became the first rock and roll million seller. It is estimated that the record has now sold in excess of 200 million copies worldwide, beaten only by Bing Crosby's White Christmas. In its wake, Bill Haley and the Comets became the first rock and roll act to appear on Ed Sullivan's influential TV show, and in 1956 starred in the first 2 rock and roll films, Rock Around the Clock and Don't Knock the Rock. Billboard magazine uses the year of the record's first success as a dividing line for its music industry statistics. 1955 onwards is for them the rock era. The moment that rhythm and blues and the rhythmic country played by the likes of Bill Haley became known as rock and roll is well documented. DJ Alan Freed was working on Cleveland radio station WJWAM from 1950, presenting an evening music program, classical music according to Freed himself, on a YouTube video clip of his appearance on the 50s television show To Tell the Truth. In any event, at some point early in 1951, Freed was invited to visit a Cleveland record store, Record Rendezvous, run by Leo Mintz, who was keen to draw the DJ's attention to the fact that a large number of white teenagers were buying rhythm and blues records. He persuaded Alan Freed to begin a radio show immediately following the one he was already hosting in order to highlight the rhythm and blues music. Freed was quickly won over, and on July the 11th began broadcasting a show he called the Moondog House. It was during 1952 that the crucial moment occurred. It was recalled by Bill Haley's bass player, Marshall Little, during a 1994 interview for the Las Vegas Sun. I was there when Alan Freed coined the phrase rock and roll. It was 1952 and the Comets were in Cleveland to promote Rock the Joint on Freed's show. As the song played, with its 4 times repeated chorus line, "We're gonna rock, rock this joint," Freed began pounding on the table and shouting rock and roll for all his radio listeners to hear, as he had left the microphone switched on. Afterwards, Little said, the people kept calling up and saying, "Will you play that rock and roll song again?" He played it 12 times. That's the night rock and roll was invented.
We're gonna tear down the mailbox, rip up the floor, smash out the windows and knock down the door. We're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint tonight. Well, 6 times 6 is 36. I ain't gonna hit for 6 more licks. We're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint tonight. Sugarfoot rag, side by side, a flying low and a flying wide. We're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint, we're gonna rock this joint tonight.
Rock the Joint was released on April the 26th, so we can presume that the event Marshall Little describes took place round about then. Alan Freed renamed his show Moondog's Rock and Roll Party soon afterwards. He tried to copyright the phrase rock and roll, but it was not long before it became part of the everyday language, and Freed's attempt failed. In August 1954, Alan Freed moved to a radio station in New York, WINS, and Alan Freed's Rock and Roll Party was syndicated to over 40 other radio stations across the USA. The listeners of all these stations discovered quickly that the music they liked was called rock and roll, and by early 1956, the year when Elvis Presley had his first big hits, the music industry too had accepted the term and was using it in its advertising.